your way up here at this time. Thank you so much. First, we want to thank all of you for coming out to show support for this important event. And thank you to the Alabama Birth Coalition for hosting and for inviting us. My name is Brianna Barker. I'm the Advocacy Director for ICAN and the Chapter Leader of ICAN of Huntsville.
My name is Elise Schultz, and I am an ICAN of Huntsville co-leader and our treasurer.
My name is Justen Alexander. I am the Vice President of ICAN, and I'm also a chapter co-leader in Huntsville.
ICAN is the International Cesarean Awareness Network. We're a nonprofit whose mission is to reduce preventable cesareans through education, to support cesarean recovery, and to advocate for vaginal birth after cesarean, or VBAC. A doctor who was recently awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award by the Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine got up as a keynote speaker at an ACOG's conference a few days ago and argued that there is nothing wrong with a 90% cesarean rate. He said that vaginal delivery was overrated and old-fashioned. The tone of his message was that to be beautiful and successful as a woman, a scheduled cesarean is a great choice. He used the anecdotal, singular example that Posh Spice didn't have Accreta after her 4 scheduled cesareans. He misspelled Accreta on that slide. His closing statements were that vaginal lacerations were ugly and cesarean scars were beautiful, complete with an offensive zipper reference to cesarean scars. Is this ringing what is valued about American women today? The most common surgery performed on Americans is the cesarean section, or C-section. A potentially life-saving procedure that, make no mistake, we are grateful for in those truly emergent situations. But from a surgeon's standpoint, they are routine and common. I've heard them described as easy peasy. They're easier to schedule. You can even have an entire day devoted to back-to-back scheduled cesareans. But for so many of us, our cesarean was not easy peasy. The longer and more painful recovery impacted our lives. It made caring for our little ones more difficult. That isn't even including the emotional impacts that range so very wide and can even include PTSD-level trauma, or the complications that can arise and intensify the difficult situation. And then from a public health point of view, surgical complications only happen if you have surgery. And multiple surgeries on the same site show to cause exponential growth of these very serious risks. Birth impacts finance and politics too, especially in a state like ours where over half of the births are paid for by the state. In sub-Saharan Africa, maternal mortality is going down, but in the U.S., it's going up and has been going up for the last 20 years by 50%. And here in Alabama, twice the amount of black babies are dying versus white babies. There has been a 500% increase in the use of cesarean section in the last generation or two of mothers. Let that sink in. There's an American-based malpractice organization that has begun charging midwives a $1,500 fee per VBAC client. The fee is not sustainable for providers. There are routinely used VBAC calculators that disproportionately affect women of color. These things will lead to increased rates of preventable and unwanted cesareans. Dr. Neil Shaw said in 2018, the biggest risk factor for a woman for the most common surgery performed is not the woman's preference or her medical risks, but simply the door that she walks through. He said this in response to showing how huge the variations in C-sections are from hospital to hospital, and we see those differences in variation in Alabama as well. But hospitals don't generate cesarean rates all by themselves, but with the providers that have privileges there. This has to be addressed on every level. So often we hear blame placed on women and birthing people for these increased rates of cesarean because they're older or more obese or sicker than past generations. But in Shaw's research, he has seen that for an 18-year-old today, her risks of cesarean have doubled over her lifetime. Preliminary data shows that 34.6% of the Alabama births in 2016 were via major abdominal surgery, and only an 8.6 VBAC rate. That means that 91.4% of those birthing after a prior cesarean had another cesarean in 2016. Why is something deemed safe and appropriate for most women by ACOG so rare? At Grandview Hospital in Birmingham, out of close to 1,000 births, 42.8% were cesareans, and only one VBAC in 2016. While their neighbor Princeton Baptist Medical Center, out of 319 births, had 30 VBACs and a cesarean rate of 20.4%.
Go Princeton!
In our own area, we're excited to see more VBACs happening since our chapter began in 2013, but we still have a ways to go. Cesarean rates locally range from 26.3% to 40.3%. The truth is that women and families can still find it very difficult to journey through finding a supportive provider when planning a TOLAC, a child labor after cesarean. And many still leave our area to access that support, which is crazy to think of in a major city as wonderful as ours. And some cannot access that care out of our area. I traveled 2.5 hours during labor, twice.
These days, we are talking a lot about consent as it relates to maternity care. We have rights as birthing people to informed consent. What that means is we have the right to have all the unbiased risks, benefits, and alternatives to a medical or midwifery recommendation. And that it is ultimately our decision to consent or say yes or refuse, say no to that recommendation. We also have the responsibility to own those decisions and their outcomes. As ACOG states, pregnancy is not an exception to the principle that a decisionally capable patient has the right to refuse treatment, even treatment needed to maintain life. Therefore, a decisionally capable pregnant woman's decision to refuse recommended medical or surgical intervention should be respected. When doing work as ICAN leaders in our community, it has become painfully clear that families come up short so many times in regards to this vital right being respected during such a vulnerable time. There is no excuse for the vast majority of the women we have asked over these last 5 years, having not been counseled about the risks or even the existence of placenta accreta, a complication that has been directly linked to multiple cesareans, carries a 90% chance of blood transfusion, and has an estimated 1 in 14 risk of death for the mother who has the condition. Acting on someone's body without consent is assault or battery. What comes to mind when we first think about this in birth might be physically dragging someone into the OR for an unwanted cesarean while they actively say no. It sickens me to tell you that this has happened in our country. But what we don't always think of is the act of coercion, emotional manipulation, or inaccurate information to gain consent invalidates it. And so ultimately, if we consent for a cesarean, if the consent for a cesarean was not valid, could it legally be viewed as battery? Our research points towards yes, though we don't have precedents for this yet. But it is something that providers and facilities need to take a good, hard look at. After all, don't we all want patients to be informed, fully informed, before they have major surgery?
So what is there to be done? What will improve these things? First, we believe change will ultimately be driven by consumer demands. In ICAN, we talk a lot about voting with your feet. We encourage women to go where they are being best served, where they hear that other people have had the type of experiences they are looking for, which we feel is respectful, evidence-based care. And we encourage communicating with the provider the reasons why you are leaving your practice and what it would take to get you back. Look into a complaint process if your rights were violated. We need more accountability. The internet is a powerful thing. Consider writing a public review and give specific examples of what you experienced. A big difference maker is going to be the continued support of these issues beyond when you yourself need support, which is why I'm going to keep showing up even though I'm done having babies. And we need you to do the same.
Right.
And tell your stories, write it out, and share it when you are ready. They matter. They have power to help another person. This is why the Me Too movement is so powerful, because people feel they aren't alone and that it is safe to speak. Secondly, we call to hospital administrators to pay attention to these cesarean and VBAC rates. Make sure you have mother and baby-friendly policies in place. Hire midwives. Start an incentive program for providers. Marshall Medical South has a VBAC incentive program that has effectively increased their VBAC rates. Form a task force. Train staff on shared decision-making and ethically what to do when a patient declines a recommendation, which is their right. Make the complaint process for your unit easier for new families. There should be a way for maternity care consumers to quickly and easily file formal complaints that trigger an internal review process. Create ways for nurses to file complaints with a true sense of job security. Transparency. We call on hospitals to publicly provide the statistics of their providers. Allow the consumers to see the cesarean and VBAC rates so that we can make informed choices. Other states have used this method to reduce their overall cesarean rates, and it worked. Now is the time. The eyes of the nation and your community are watching, and we believe in you and your power to make necessary change. Lastly, and very importantly, providers must prioritize and value the need for change in maternity care. Providers are human too. Many are likely walking around with secondary trauma that they deal with as they work in a high-stress, highly litigious field, and I want to say that we know that isn't easy. But as Thomas Paine said, a long habit of not thinking a thing wrong gives it a superficial appearance of being right. We understand that change is uncomfortable, but admitting that there is a problem is the first step. So please, we call to our providers to get continuing education on shared decision-making, the ethics of refusal of medically recommended procedures in pregnancy, and on physiological birth itself. Please stop acting as if VBAC is a procedure that you can choose to do or not to do. VBAC is a physiological process that a birthing person's body does in the absence of surgical delivery. And if patients do have the right to informed consent, then it is unethical and not legally enforceable to ban VBAC at the hospital or provider level. Reassess how you are counseling people with a prior cesarean. Please don't counsel patients in a way that suggests that cesareans are no big deal or are risk-free. Check your bias, information, and whether you are truly supporting the patient to make the decision. Publish your statistics. Connect your patients with ICAN to help support their recovery. ICAN is here to give education, support, and to advocate for the patient's rights and their access to care. And we plan to keep marching forward towards improving maternal child health. Do you?